evening, everyone. Welcome to the tent. What a great space, huh? It's very accommodating, very comfortable, and very unique. Welcome to our October meeting of the Sturbridge Historical Society. We thank you all for coming, and we thank the Public House for being generous hosts and providing the refreshments in the space, which is very wonderful. We appreciate that. We have an event coming up November 6th. It's a Thursday. It's the semi-annual decoration of the cemetery. Thursday, November 6th at 10 a.m. We'll be meeting at the old cemetery right here next to the Public House, where we'll be decorating the graves of Revolutionary War soldiers. It's a tradition that Bob Greer brought back from his childhood, and we've been doing it in a number of years. We have some special guests, sons and daughters of the American Revolution show up, and the Public House, I believe, provides the flags, and we decorate every grave that we recognize as Revolutionary War soldiers. So if you are available November 6th, Thursday at 10 a.m., please join us at the cemetery right up here for the decoration of the graves of Revolutionary War soldiers. Our next program in November will be November 20th, and the title is Lost Towns of the Swift River Valley Drowned by the Quabbin. It will be presented by Alina Palladino. In April of 1938, Swift River Valley residents held a farewell ball to mark the demise of the quintessential New England town of Enfield and its three smaller neighbors, Greenwich, Dana, and Prescott. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts sacrificed these towns to build the Quabbin, a massive reservoir of drinking water for the residents of Boston. Author and historian Alina Palladino recounts the story of these communities as seen through the eyes of those who lived there until the end. Alina grew up in Sturbridge and now lives with her family in the former home of Enfield resident Marion Smith, which was moved to Ware. She works in higher education in Western Massachusetts. This is her first book. So join us November 20th for the story about the lost valley, the lost towns drowned by the Quabbin. Tonight we have our own local Ellen Duzak. She will be presenting a program Strolling through Concord with Louisa May Alcott. Ellen Duzak is a retired professor of psychology at Becker College. For a decade after retiring, she taught courses on historical and literary giants of the New England area at the Worcester Institute for Senior Education at Assumption College. Recently, she has given lectures in local libraries and civic organizations. She has had a passionate love of the Concord area, its political and literary history, and its people since first visiting Louisa May Alcott's Orchard House as a child. With her husband, she has been a colonial reenactor in the Concord area, as well as in Sturbridge. She is active in the Joshua High Library and has been a part of their book discussions for over 30 years. So please welcome tonight's speaker, Ellen Duzak.
Thank you. Get used to this, okay. First of all, it's nice to see so many friendly faces, so many people I know, and it's just delightful to be here with you. I have taught about Louisa May Alcott and the idea of strolling through Concord with her. The idea being that she came in 1840 to Concord as an 8-year-old. And I thought, what if we could see it through her eyes, not through our modern eyes? I'm going to try to move that down a little bit. There we go. Not through our modern eyes that are saying, this is what these people of another century told us. But what if she's just living as these are the adults around her, and later as she's one of the adults also as a part of the Concord scene? And as Doug introduced me, Mom was the greatest Little Women fan of all times. And as a child, we would go to Orchard House and many of the other houses. Blake and I, my husband Blake and I recently, I think within the last month, Blake, did a nice tour. We love Concord, but we did Emerson's house, and we've done the Old Manse, we've done, my goodness, I dragged him to Louisa May Alcott's Orchard House many times. But the idea is, what if we see it through the 1840s as if we are there? What if we say, these are people just forming their ideas, but these ideas are the ideas that we hold today. The America before the 1840s in Concord were the ideas of England, were the ideas of Germany, were the ideas of France. We were still attached to our European roots without having a sense of who our voice, our sense of identity, our philosophy, our ethos, our belief systems. So very exciting to think that in this very small time and space, and this very small group of people, and everyone they touched, and I don't know, but it was something I meant to ask, and maybe as a question to some of our historians here, I don't know where the closest lyceum was at the time here, but I'm sure Emerson and Thoreau at times did come and speak locally. I know they were out as far as Northampton because we've been out to Emily Dickinson's house, and Evergreen was host to Emerson. So my guess is that I'm going to ask you tonight to say, I live either in Sturbridge or Sturbridge area, or perhaps I live in Concord. Maybe I'm making that choice, but it's the 1840s. And how am I responding to this brand new way of seeing the world that had never been experienced before? I'm going to be a little attached to my notes tonight more than I usually am. Some of you have been to other lectures with me, and I want to get it right, if you know what I mean. This is historical society, so we want to get it right. So bear with me. I can either pull my glasses down and not see you and see my notes, or I can see you. So this is going to be an interesting evening. Bear with me. According to John Hanson Mitchell in his book, Walking Towards Walden, A Pilgrimage in Search of Place, more than any other community in American history, Concord, Massachusetts evokes what the Hopi people called, and I love this, the centering place, the place where you belong, the spiritual core of the universe. For the first 5,000 years ago, we're going to see that Native Americans came to where the Concord River met with the Assabet and Sudbury rivers. It's a very, very fertile, beautiful area. The tract was the first inland community for Europeans. We're just like 5 years past the original area on the coastline. It was the place where the world's first war for independence took place, or began. It was the place where American literature flourished, and I want you to hear this, American literature. This isn't Dickens, this isn't Thackeray, this isn't the people of England or France, Voltaire. This is American literature for the first time. And it's the place where, to this day, and this astounded me, it attracts writers. 400 plus writers have lived or worked in Concord in its short history. I think the latest one we just read in our book discussion, Doris Kearns Goodwin, and we didn't get a chance to see it, but her special room with her, dedicated to herself and her husband, Dick Goodwin, is part of the library now, and they lived there for many years. So in Concord, and bear with me, here we go. Let me see if I can get this correct. Maybe this way. Maybe not. Should I be aiming it at something else? Okay, just get me to the first one. It's okay. And it's okay, because while he's doing that, we can just, that just means, well, it doesn't look like me. shot heard around the world. And then in the 1800s, there's a cultural revolution that came to define the voice, the ideals, the philosophy, and the literature of a young America. But more than that, what about environmental issues? Thank you. Yeah, here we go. There we are. So here we are with the political revolution of 1775. But more than that, what about environment? What about conservation? What about education? What about women's rights that are first addressed in Concord? And certainly, I'm hoping, are also addressed in Sturbridge in the same 1840s time. The slavery issue was tearing the country apart then, but they dared to debate it, and anti-slavery groups, including many of the people we'll be talking about tonight, are formed. Again, who were we in all of this? And I'm referring to the we of the Sturbridge area. It was the American Renaissance, the flowering of New England, and here's the names. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who we're going to keep referring to as Waldo, because that's how he likes to be known. Henry David Thoreau. Rather eccentric Bronson Alcott, and Margaret Fuller. They're creating this new perception of mankind with the transcendentalist ideas. I want you to think about this. In Sturbridge, we at this point have a Baptist, a Unitarian, and a Congregational church, where about 40 years before we're going to see a Catholic church. But the Calvinist and the Puritan ideas are starting to become a little more liberal. And you have to start thinking about who would you have belonged to? And how would you have seen some of these transcendental ideas? Nature as our personal connection to the divine. Wow. An emphasis on individual self-reliance. A sense that God existed in every human being, which is something I taught in Rachel Carson quite a long time later. And the idea that the self is of infinite worth and perfectible. I think the Calvinists and the Puritans, same people, would have had a hard time with some of that. Emerson's nature and self-reliance, Thoreau's Walden, Bronson Alcott's ideas on education, and trust me, you don't want to try to read Bronson Alcott. You want to listen to him maybe, but you don't want to read him. And Fuller's treatise on women's rights. It's still the one that started the whole thing for women's rights. Woman in the 19th century challenged the conservative and puritanical views of a young America. There's different people that I've been reading about of that time that thought these people were all quacks, that they were eccentric, that we should stick with the conservative views. Again, who are we in all of this? I want to make sure we think of ourselves, what are we, 40 miles away? So close, but so far. I want you to also remember that our new American literature starts with Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. And thank you to my mother for introducing me to Louisa May Alcott's Little Women. I want you to think about not just who you were in terms of some of the transcendental theories, but how are you going to see Emerson and Thoreau? How are you going to see women's rights? And did you read those books? Did you read Scarlet Letter? What, were you shocked? Did you read Little Women? By the way, I think everybody read Little Women. It sold out constantly and has never been out of print since the day it was first printed, which is pretty cool stuff. Now I get to play. Here we go. We were just there last month, the Old Manse. Absolutely exquisite. You're going to park across the street for the parking lot for the Old North Bridge, and you need to go there. Blake and I took a tour last Christmas time, and we were the only two. It was supposed to be a 20 to 25 minute tour, and were we 2 hours there? I had so many questions I couldn't stop, and it's the women of that unbelievably beautiful home that absolutely captured me. But we're going to start at the beginning with, it's just a beautiful, beautiful, right behind it, the river, the Old North Bridge is just to the side. And I just grabbed two of the rooms and a side view that you can see. You're pretty much walking towards the North Bridge to look at that direction, and then here's one of the rooms that they're showing. And what I love about this is that Reverend William Emerson, obviously a relative of Ralph Waldo's, arrives in 1765. He's going to be the minister at the church. And by the way, in 3 different books, it just said the church. So in 1765, my assumption is that's all there is at the beginning. He marries Phoebe Bliss. He constructs the manse right away, right by North Bridge. Absolutely beautiful. Right behind it is the boathouse. It's just a gorgeous place. He knows what he believes. And right from the altar, he preaches liberty and against the oppression of England. He knows exactly what he stands for. When the Minutemen militia of Concord were formed, he becomes their chaplain. And when he's looking out his window at the North Bridge, he sees the British troops coming, goes out to his Minutemen and rallies them. Rah, rah. He is so in favor of what needs to be done. I'd love to tell you a good and happy ending to his story. He does become a military chaplain, leaving his parish career. However, at Fort Ticonderoga, he gets camp fever, tries to get home, and somewhere in an unmarked grave in Vermont, at age 33, he dies and is buried. That is 1776. He didn't make it very long into the Rev War. He leaves Phoebe with 5 kids. And what's she gonna do? She's still at the old manse, but she has no income. She marries the newest minister. Ezra Ripley turns out to be a marvelous man. They have 3 more children together, and he takes all 8 children under his wing. He's a really good man. I've never read a bad word about him. As a step-grandfather, he is the one that really takes Ralph Waldo Emerson, under his wing when stepson William dies. Waldo Emerson's father dies of illness when he is only 8 years old. What I love is, later on, when Waldo's an adult, he goes to the manse again in 1834. He's a grieving widower. We'll talk more about him in just a couple of minutes. And he's recently left the ministry. I mean, he has just left everything he believes in. He is really having a hard time. He sits down and writes his book, Nature, which defines the entire transcendentalist philosophy. It's the first statement ever made, but I think the most powerful, which celebrates again unity between God, the soul, and nature. Waldo says, I'll stay in Concord. Leaves the manse to get his own place, which we'll see in a minute. And here we have who comes next. So the manse also has new occupants. This is in 1842, so we have a 10-year-old Louisa May Alcott able to meet Sophia, and believe me, Sophia, not Sophia. Everybody has funky names, believe me. They work very hard at making sure they're individuals. Sophia Peabody and Nathaniel Hawthorne. So Sophia is one of the 3 Peabody sisters. There are about 10 books out there on the Peabody sisters. Elizabeth runs the bookstore in Boston. It doesn't have a name, but it's very famous near Brattle Street. And upstairs, you can come to the Transcendental group if you're one of the men, or Margaret Fuller. Margaret Fuller has the mind of a man, so she's allowed to go there. And for the women, Margaret Fuller also gives her conversations. And people come in from as far away as New York to hear her conversations. People meaning women. In this instance, she's all about women's rights. It's a very exciting time. And Elizabeth is the one, that pretty boy Nathaniel, I'm sorry. He's a pretty boy, you know that. Okay. And also, I forgot to say this to Blake, but I think our granddaughters would call him a player. There's no question. He dates Elizabeth, dates being a very modern word, but he's with Elizabeth all the time. It looks like he wants to marry her. But Sophia is a little bit more submissive and gentle. He likes the liveliness, the conversation, the excitement, the energy of Elizabeth. But Sophia is a semi-invalid. Why is she a semi-invalid? Because she gets migraines, and Dad's a doctor. And how do we doctor somebody with migraines in the 1840s? We give them opium and calomel, which is mercury poisoning, completely destroying the central nervous system if taken long enough and in high enough doses. Dad's dosing her very well. In one article I read, he also thought that those weren't working well enough, so he found a nice medicine that had a bit of arsenic in it. She becomes a semi-invalid, and I don't think we have to question why. The migraines aren't the problem, the medicine is. However, Mom decides that she's a semi-invalid, and she takes her puts her in bed and keeps her helpless. And it seems that there's almost a cult of this, of keeping women in this very helpless state, especially the smart ones, especially the ones that want to do more with their lives. There's a definite question of what's going on there. So she finally, a sister says, I'm going to Cuba, and I'm going to be a governess there. Come with me. For 18 months she goes to Cuba. She's an artist. She does her paintings, she does her art. She writes a beautiful thing called the Cuba Journal, which is extremely naturalistic. Henry David Thoreau's Walden would feel comfortable with that. Definitely the transcendentalists would understand it. And remember, she's been exposed to all of this through her sister Elizabeth as well. And we're going to see that she gets better for those 18 months. Guess who's not there? Dad dosing her. Of course, she starts to heal and as well. Amazingly enough, she comes home and starts getting sick again. How much is psychological? How much is Dad dosing her? Who knows? But Nathaniel Hawthorne comes along. Now, I put in my notes, and it's hysterical. He's considered beautiful and he knows it. Some woman just stopped him on the street. It's in every single book you read about Nathaniel Hawthorne and says, are you a person or an angel? Evidently he had these gray-green eyes that were just mesmerizing. But I love this. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow went to college with him at Bowdoin. And he says, he was a strange owl, but very pleasant to look at. Hawthorne liked the ladies, especially those intellectuals like Sister Elizabeth. By the way, there is a third sister, Mary, and I'm sorry that I didn't mention her, and she is a teacher, an educator, helps out with both sisters, and ends up marrying Horace Mann. Everybody is interrelated. It's just sort of amazing that every name I read, I already know. It's sort of amazing. And if we're Louisa May Alcott, these are just people down the street. This is just, I want you to have that picture, that this is just the most natural thing in the world. So he goes away to Bowdoin. Father has died when he's 8 at sea. And they had been a prosperous family, but sort of fall apart after Dad dies. And his sisters raise him and pamper him. He is just, the boy. He comes home from Bowdoin, and everything I read says he stayed in his bedroom for the next 10 years. I sort of worry about Sophia Peabody marrying this guy. He does not sound like he's playing with a big deck at that point. He comes back out into the world, starts dating Elizabeth Peabody, starts dating 2 or 3 other women, like I said, a total player, decides he's going to join a utopian community, Brook Farm, that's in West Roxbury. Margaret Fuller's there. He thinks she's pretty nifty too. She's brilliant, she's exciting. But again, he wants somebody passive and somebody that can be under his thumb as a wife. So he secretly proposes to Sophia. And they keep their engagement secret for 3 years. I don't know about you, but does that sound as fishy to you as it does to me? Yeah. If he doesn't see something better in the next 3 years, he'll marry her, is what I thought. However, In the meantime, Sophia, very talented, goes to Emerson's house as an artist and as a friend of the family. And she does a beautiful statue or bust of Emerson's brother Charles, who has died of TB. And Emerson is deeply touched. So when he learns that she is secretly engaged, he says, when you get married, I'll get you to live at Old Manse, my family home, now that I'm living elsewhere. Guess what? Nathaniel doesn't enjoy Brook Farm because they made him do physical labor. He really hated that. He leaves Brook Farm. He gets married because it's the easiest thing to come along, and this is my favorite quote. Can you tell Hawthorne's not on my happy list? Never teaches I'm a psychologist, I'm sorry, I have to tell you what I think. He tells his sister in a letter the day after his marriage, his wedding, the execution took place yesterday. Yep. So now, let's do a little bit of Hawthorne, because again, can you imagine Louisa going over to visit these people and how wonderful and exciting it is? He's a Hawthorne who's, I think it was, his grandfather was one of the hanging judges in the Salem witch trials. Now, you know the Hawthorne Inn in Salem, the Colonial Inn in Concord, and the Public Inn are all owned by the same people. But Hawthorne originally did not have a W in it. And when Nathaniel came along, he wanted to deny all of these terrible roots, this awful experience of having this hanging judge in the background. So magically, I guess, if you put a W in your name, all will be forgotten and forgiven. Well, of course it wasn't. It was Salem. Nobody forgot a thing. We know that he's not at all social when he comes to Concord. He's really very antisocial. There's no question about it. Some books say he's shy, and others just say he doesn't care. He doesn't really want to. He makes fun of Bronson Alcott. He makes fun of some of the others. I do enjoy the fact that the one person he does enjoy is Thoreau. He does see how genuine he is, and even though they don't match in any normal way that we would expect, they do become good friends. And they become good friends walking, taking nature walks, talking about natural things. He and Emerson don't get along at all. Did you ever see two alpha males? Definitely. They're not going to work together, but also Margaret Fuller keeps coming for visits. And they both got the hots for her. If you read Susan Cheever, and Susan Cheever, by the way, in American Bloomsbury, does in fact make everybody fall in love with everybody, so you have to take her with a grain of salt. But she does a beautiful job with giving you the information. In the back where Sandy is, I've got a nice handout that you can take a picture of that gives you all possibilities for readings, possible further readings. And American Bloomsbury is a good one there as well. So what I love is that Margaret Fuller comes along, and Emerson and Hawthorne, who are both perfectly happy married men, are completely gaga over her, and there's a competition going on as well. Well, by 1846, Emerson's had it with Hawthorne. Turns out he never pays his rent. And what he and his wife considered Eden, Sophia, and that he has written something called Mosses from an Old Manse, which is published only 6 months later, they're evicted. It's 1846. And when they're evicted, it now finally becomes known as the Old Manse because of that. Now, I couldn't find a good picture of this, but Sarah and Samuel Ripley come along. They're back to the house where Ezra Ripley's son has retired from the ministry. And here's the one that I want Louisa to be with. I did not find any readings that she was, but I don't think she would. I think she would have gravitated to this woman. You've got to hear the name, Sarah Alden Bradford Ripley. She's a descendant of William Bradford and John Alden. It doesn't get more cool with the gene pool than that. She is a brilliant scholar. And her sea captain father is so far ahead of his time that he encourages her studies, very unusual, and she can learn whatever she wants with whatever tutor she chooses. There are no restrictions. She has to ask permission to learn Latin because girls shouldn't learn Latin. When I taught psychology classes at Becker, one of the things in one of my abnormal books said that in that time frame, the concern was if you put too many ideas in a woman's head, it would get to be too much and it would affect her reproductive organs, which was the only important part of her body. And the way they treated women was pretty frightening, but this man was way ahead of his time. Now I have to read this because it's just so amazing. She's a brilliant scholar of Latin, Greek, Italian, German, and get this, she learns French so well by 14 that she's reading Voltaire's novels in French. Wow. Add to that mathematics, philosophy, chemistry, astronomy, and her greatest love, which is botany. Now there's a famous botanist, Asa Gray. I love botany, so it's very important to me. And he says that no other woman in that field could match her at that time. Now, she gets married because her father thinks it's a good idea, but she's never been denied to keep learning. It's just a wonderful relationship. However, as a minister's wife, she's got a whole lot of roles as a minister's wife. She gives birth to 9 children, of which 7 live till adulthood. And they decide that there's not enough money in being a minister in Waltham, so she decides to run a boarding school for boys where she's the school teacher while she's having 9 children, being the minister's wife. The only negative I ever read about her, and it's not a negative, it's just she said, I'm exhausted. And like all the other women, and I cannot find one that didn't, has bad headaches. Gee, I wonder why. So Samuel dies only 2 years after they return in that 1846 to the old manse. And guess what she does for the next 20 years? Love this. She tutors the boys from Harvard who can't figure out what to do. Harvard sends them to Concord to her because they say, and this is Harvard President Edward Everett says, she was a woman who could have filled any professor's chair in the college. But as a woman, she gets to tutor. The other thing was she was in her 70s, so I'm sympathizing with that. She said she was having a hard time with the new language she was learning. It was taking her a lot longer. It was Sanskrit. So she never stopped learning, and she had that great hunger for it, and I love that. I love the idea of Louisa May and her sisters all being exposed to this, and these people, just a vibrant part of the community. So we're moving on to Ralph Waldo. Let's see where we are. And I'm sorry, that one came out blurry, and you can't always tell when you're getting them online. But that is Ralph Waldo Emerson's home. And the American Renaissance really starts with Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's his dream to carry together a gathering of the best minds in Concord. He graduates from Harvard and Harvard Divinity School. He becomes a minister, a Unitarian minister, and he marries the love of his life. And I'm not sure of my sequence here, sorry. We'll go back to that one. There's Ralph. They all look a bit alike at this time, don't they? And I want to show you these. And I'll go back to that other slide because it's important. He marries the love of his life, Ellen Tucker. He gets his first job as the Unitarian minister for the Old North Church. It's a big deal. And remember, his dad was a minister as well, and his grandfather. He has a legacy there. And all is well. But Ellen, who by the way is extremely rich, but is truly, I can't stress this enough, the love of his life. He knows she's not well when they marry, and TB or consumption is huge at that time. It's one of the plagues of that century, no question. He's already lost 2 brothers to this. Charles being the one that we talked about, him doing the bus stuff later. They know she's frail, but some people live for years and years and years with it. And again, in her instance, she's very frail and makes it only 2 years into their marriage. He is devastated, honestly devastated. He's a good man, and he's completely, can't even believe that this has happened. He walks away from his ministry. Everything that he thought he believed, he is just, forget it. I would call it a dark night of the soul, very definitely. It was huge, it was strong. So he starts to step away from all of the different rituals of his church, of his ministry, and instead he likes the spiritual practices based in nature, based in just interactions with people and in daily living. Certainly the inklings of that transcendental. He regroups with a trip to Europe. Amazingly, these people come and go from Europe like it was the easiest thing in the world. It always floors me how hard those journeys had to have been. He gets to meet Thomas Carlyle, who he becomes a lifelong friend of. He's a Scottish philosopher, and again, he's going to encourage him in some of these transcendental ideas that are coming. And I am so jealous. I was an English major way before I was a psychologist. He gets to meet Coleridge and Wordsworth from the Romantic poets. He says they were a bit old and stodgy. Well, I don't care. I wish I could have met them. But he sees all of those. He comes back with an idea to develop his own philosophy of self-reliance. We know that phrase from him. And who are we as a country, if not that phrase, self-reliance? But who gives it to us? Who starts us on that idea of individuality and the power of who we can be? Then Emerson. So now he inherits his wife's share of the family fortune. She is from a very wealthy New Hampshire family. A brother-in-law fights him on this, and he takes him to court. And he says, I don't want my wife's mother or sister's money, but you get your paws off of this. I want that money. And what he doesn't say, and he does win, by the way, he gets a good inheritance from this. He's not doing this just to become a rich man. He's doing this so that he can create a community within Concord of people that can come together with the ideas that he's starting to think about. He buys his home, the one that we just know, go back now. We'll see Lydia in a minute. Oh, there we go. He buys his home for $3,500, and I'm wondering how much that would be nowadays. That's 1835. And he brings to town and sustains the Alcotts many times. The Hawthorns come and go, as well as supporting and employing Henry David Thoreau, and constantly hosting Margaret Fuller, not something that a later wife is happy about. And I love this phrase from Susan Cheever, holds no bars in American Bloomsbury, but it is fun to read. She says, he's the sugar daddy of American literature. I thought that was an interesting way of thinking about it. So in 1835, we're going to keep coming back to that, yes. There he is again. In 1835, he marries Lydia Jackson of Plymouth. She's there with one of the kids. Lydia's becomes Lydian. Nobody gets to keep their names. Do you notice this? Sophia and everybody, whatever, Waldo. So he decides that Lydia is just too plain and he wants it to be Lydian instead, and he renames her. He calls their marriage a very somber joy. I'm not getting a really good image of marriage in the 1840s, and I'm not signing up to be a wife then. I'm beginning to understand why Louisa May Alcott wanted to stay single. He sees her 3 or 4 times in Plymouth when he comes to give lectures or sermons. He then writes a letter of proposal to her, which she answers by letter. I don't think I would have thought about romance too much, and she had to get the drift that she's not the love of his life. He needs a wife. Let's be honest, he needs a wife to be taking care of him in his household. So it's a really interesting match. She thinks they're a spiritual partners, but she keeps getting more and more orthodox, more and more strict in her religious and her philosophical views as he becomes more free-thinking and unconventional. She never really settles in Concord, and that even when we were on the tour at the Emerson House, which is, I would say, one of the best tours we've taken. It was really spectacular, very well done, again, just a month ago. She never gets over to her time in Plymouth and who she was there. She can't find her way. Even the daughters, Ellen and Edith, say she just doesn't ever find her way. She's restless, becomes strict, compulsive, perfectionistic. She doesn't find that connection to Emerson that she'd hoped. He's finding his connections in this world he's creating, and what he gets is a wife and mom for his kids, and he's not seeing that as the partnership she had hoped for. She used to get up in the middle of the night to rearrange everything because she was worried that the books weren't lined up in proper order. You know, a little obsessive compulsive stuff, sort of sad. Now, one of my favorite parts, and they told us this in the tour, but I've heard it before, she kept the windows wide open all winter, and there's only very small fireplaces in the different rooms originally. Better, they put stoves in later, and everyone is freezing cold all winter, but that's her belief on staying healthy. Also, she admires bathing in cold water in the mornings for health. But here's the one that's my favorite. Her neighbor is Mrs. Ellery Channing, who, by the way, is Margaret Fuller's sister. They're all related. There's like not even 6 degrees of separation at all. So Mrs. Ellery Channing takes it one step further with her newborn baby girl. And this is a quote. "I plunge the baby into the stone-cold water each morning. The child comes out looking like a little red lobster." Isn't that wonderful? Oh my God. How anybody survives this is beyond me. The Emersons have 2 daughters, Ellen and Edith, who live to a ripe old age, and one of the 2 stays in the house into the 20th century. And Ellen really takes care of Emerson in the later years of his life when memory starts to fail and we're starting to see him become a lot more vague. She's always by his side. There are 2 sons, Edward and Waldo. Waldo being the older, and Waldo they lose to scarlet fever at 5. The devastation for Lydia she never gets over it. She takes to her bed for years. People come in to help with the household. She recovers enough and lives into her 90s, but it takes years for her to get over this depression, this melancholy. Emerson's a leading citizen in Concord. He's respected, he's set a bit apart because he's a minister and a man and a scholar. He continues his own writings, and one of his important works is called Representative Men, and he starts lecturing across all of New England and beyond. But this is the picture. I'm hoping, I never remember where I'm at here. I'm not the queen of PowerPoint, I will guarantee you this. This is the room, this is the only room they let you sit down in. Like, you were sitting in that chair and I was sitting there. And they let you sit down in this room because the original furnishings are now at the Concord Museum. Everything else is original to the Emerson house because it stayed in the family for so long. However, in this room, donated to the Concord Museum was the room of the study of Emerson. So they have reproduced it and you can sit in that room. And on this wall, the wall facing opposite, is a wall of books. And in this wall of books, Louisa May Alcott is allowed to come in, spend as much time as she wants, and to not just play in there, but to take as many books home as she wants at all times, when it's not going to be that many things available for her otherwise. It's absolutely glorious. Thoreau comes to work for Emerson and into the Emerson household, and the Alcott children and the Emerson children all play together. They're all within decent ages of each other. Henry David takes them on walks, on river rides, picnics, boating adventures. The home is house to endless deep conversations, and I love the list. Besides, obviously, Margaret Fuller, who likes to come and go, we have Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Thomas Wentworth Higginson, and Henry James, both senior and junior. welcomed. We're seeing that Emerson finds that Eden, or that dream that's becoming his reality, of all these people coming together. Okay, say goodbye to them. I thought I'd take us through town for 2 seconds. We're going to walk through town, and of course that's a 21st century picture, but I found one black and white in one magazine that I have actually in the back, you can see it. It's not that different. And I have taught about Louisa May Alcott at Overlook, and at Overlook one man came up to me, and this was a good 10 years ago, and said, I remember when the slaves were going right down the main street, and he said, don't tell anybody, I don't want them to know how old I am. And I said, well, you're at Overlook. And he said, don't tell them how old I am. He said, but the slaves would go right down the main street. And he was a banker at the bank, which is the next building right here. Walking down there today, it looks exactly the same. Blake and I walked up the cemetery, which is a Rev War cemetery. That's the much later Catholic church. And we saw so many very cool names that you see over and over. And then Right Tavern, the Unitarian First Church of Concord, right here, that she'd be walking through. I wanted you to get a little bit of a picture of all of that. There isn't an ugly street in Concord. I'm sorry, if you go, and I hope you try to, and I have all sorts of brochures and cool things in the back, definitely, there's not a bad spot in there, absolutely. But now we're going to move on to Hillside, which becomes Wayside. We're talking about the Alcotts. Abba May is from a distinguished Boston family, but she's a spinster, 26, she's ancient. And her dad has remarried a woman that does not welcome her into her home once he becomes a widower. She meets and marries Bronson Alcott. And again, here we go with the let's rename ourselves. I guess as young Americans, we decided we could be whoever we want to be. So Bronson Alcott starts out as Amos Alcox, as a Connecticut peddler. He's on the list of, I could probably teach him in abnormal psychology, to be honest with you. He's a self-proclaimed educator. He's a reformer. He's a narcissist, guys. He's totally about, he should not have married and had children. He never supports them. He insists on doing things his own way, but he also does a lot of damage, especially to Louisa May Alcott, in terms of who she is. Louisa May is the only dark-haired, dark-eyed of all the 4 children that we'll talk about in a second, and he tells her that it's a sign of evil and that she has darkness inside of her, and he's very sad about that. At one point, he writes in a journal about how distressed he is by the fact that she has not gotten control of her emotions. It turns out she's 2 at that time. And at 4, they share the same birthday, and at 4, at the Temple School, where we'll meet them in just a second, at the Temple School, which he is running as an educator. By the way, he doesn't have anything past about a 6th grade education himself, but makes himself a self-proclaimed educator. He announces that we'll share the birthday. He has her hand out all the birthday cake, including the piece he's got in his own hand, and there's 1 piece left, and still a little girl to get it, and Louisa hasn't had any. She's 4. He said, what lessons have you learned? I don't see him giving up his piece of cake, by the way, okay? He makes her give the last piece of cake to the little girl, and she gets none for her own birthday. And he says that was a really good lesson for her. She spends a lifetime. I've probably read 10 books on this subject. She spends a lifetime to please him and is exhausted by him. And he's basically only about himself. They almost starve to death more than once, and he does not care as a family. It's all about him. And yet, Ralph Waldo Emerson takes him in, Thoreau takes him in. Emerson gets very tired of him, and he wears Abba, his wife, out. There's no question about it. So we have, at this Temple School in Boston, daughters Anna, Louisa May, Elizabeth, and May. The Temple School is very, very popular. Children are considered holy innocents, and they're able to teach adults important moral lessons. The Peabody sisters, again, we're going to see the same people showing up again and again. The Peabody sisters are all teaching there. Margaret Fuller shows up to teach there. It's a resounding success until Bronson decides that we really need to teach them about childbirth, God, and sex. And it's 1830-something in puritanical Boston. He's not playing with a big deck, is he? So he writes this Greek treatise, and the next thing we have is called indecent, obscene. Every child is pulled from that. There's not a penny available. The kids are hungry. And God bless Emerson, he shows up. He says, come to Concord, I'll finance you. I hate to have, and it's a quote, I hate to have all the little dogs barking at you. Think of something better to do than to attend to them. Nice, nice. I think the Alcotts are the next picture. There we are. I feel bad. I really wish Abigail took a better picture, don't you? Oh my goodness. You live with him long enough, that's what you look like. That's what I think. I think that's the problem. She's just been with him one day too long. There's no question about it. Lizzie is the one that dies young at 22. She's the one that in Little Women dies, and she does in real life. And Louisa has absolutely gorgeous, this dark, beautiful hair. After she has an illness, we see she loses a lot of this hair and has some really bad problems. But then we have the girls looking still youngish, and poor Abigail. Okay, so we have them arriving in 1840. And in 1840, again, Louisa is 8 years old. And she's coming into this really cool place, amazing. Right then, we're going to have this changing of the guard of people at the old manse in the next few years. We've got the Emersons, who are wonderful. Margaret Fuller is coming and going. The Ellery Channings are there. Again, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow shows up occasionally. And they end up at the first place, and I couldn't find a picture of this one, but if you know the Southbridge in Concord, by the water there, and that's more coming in from the west side, from the Acton side. They're staying at some place they call Dovecote Cottage. And this is all arranged by Emerson and paid for by Emerson. And it's a little rental, the Hosmer Cottage. If you want a picture of it in your mind, it's where Louisa puts newlyweds, Meg March and John Brooke in Little Women. She uses Concord over and over and over. Bronson is a former farmer's son. He does great. He does a garden with fruits and vegetables and a lovely landscape. And the Alcotts have to live by all of his beliefs. I think they're not supposed to use cotton because of the slavery, which other people are going on with. But here's the one. Sylvester Graham believed that animal flesh was not a natural food for human beings. He's the graham cracker guy, in case you want to know that. No meat, just all they had was brown graham flour, fruits and vegetables. And sometimes they were hungry. I've read this, every single thing I've read. They're always hungry, and he doesn't care. The Thoreau brothers, Henry and John, they are really wonderful. They've created something called Concord Academy. Not the Concord Academy of today, but they call it Concord Academy. And for 4 years, they run it with progressive methods. The oldest daughter, Anna, starts there, and in due time, Louisa gets to go. Henry takes them all out on wonderful nature trips all over Concord. You couldn't ask for a better education than what Henry David and John Thoreau give as an education. It's evident that Bronson's never going to provide for the family. And again, there's many hungry years, but I love this quote from Louisa. She says, "Those Concord days were the happiest of my life, for we had charming playmates in the little Emersons, the Channings, the Hawthorns, and the Goodwins, with their illustrious parents and the friends to enjoy our pranks and share our excursions." Have a picture of how powerful this time is. These people are such a big part of whom she becomes. She meets Emerson and Thoreau as this young girl. She says, and I think this is very true for her, "Emerson remained my beloved master while he lived, doing more for me as he did for many other young souls than he ever knew, by the simple beauty of his life, the truth and wisdom of his books, the example of good. She writes her first book dedicated to Ellen Emerson, whom she had read these stories or created these stories for, and it's called Fairy Flower Fables in 1854 when she's only 22. Great bond with Thoreau as well. And again, if you read Susan Cheever, she insists that she fell in love with Thoreau. I think she just thought he was a cool and wonderful Pied Piper, to be honest with you. After Bronson leaves his family to visit England, because, you know, he deserves it and Emerson pays for it, he comes home and decides, guess what? I've brought Charles Lane with me and we're going to create a utopian society. It's going to be called Fruitlands. Have you heard about Fruitlands? It was one of the biggest disasters known to mankind. You couldn't upset the sheep by taking their wool. You couldn't upset the bees by taking their honey. They were very, very brilliant theories. You couldn't upset and take the cotton because, again, that was really tragic from the slavery point of view. But they forgot, the men forgot to plant any crops because they were talking so much about their utopian society, so the women had to do all the work. Again, there was no food because they forgot to do crops. And at one point, Abba, you see that face? That's the day she got that face, trust me. She told him she had it, grabbed the kids, and went out into Harvard, Still River, that area of Still River, right by the Shaker communities, and she said, we're not coming back until you leave. She felt that she was actually fighting for her marriage, and again, I think I would have just run away personally, but for some reason she was totally devoted to him. It cost the family quite a bit in terms of emotionally they're connecting, but what I kept reading afterwards was the women ran the show after this. They'd had it, and they were never going to let him run the show again. In 1845, they come back to Concord, and guess who foots the bill? Mr. Emerson, and an inheritance that Abba got, and they buy Hillside. Let's go backwards. I don't know the shape that this is in. We did not have a chance to get there, and the last time we were here, it was not in good shape. Maybe afterwards, if anybody has gotten to be there, it wasn't that well restored at that time. But that's where they land. Louisa is 13. She gets a room of her own. They actually, as a family, shelter a runaway slave. This is 1845. This is before the Fugitive Slave Act. So they're a little bit safer than, and so is the slave at that time, traveling from Maryland to Canada. But here's the cool part. All the events in Little Women occur in the 3.5 years that the family lives at what they call Hillside. It is later referred to as Wayside. I believe the sign says Wayside. And here's the exciting part. It's a good, healthy, happy time for them. She remembers it in all the positive ways. Everybody's young, everybody's healthy, things are good. She doesn't write it for 20 more years, but these are the exact events and times that she remembers. And then, 20 years later, moving on, to Orchard House, which is spectacular. The people giving the tours there are wonderful. I know Barbara and I have been together, and it was a great experience. And at that point, she is at Orchard House 20 years later, a much older woman, a spinster, of course, and she writes it all there and sets it there so that if you go to Orchard House, they will say, this is the room where Joe did this. This is the room, because it is set there, but it was the experiences of Hillside. Poverty is so bad at one point for the Alcotts that they end up going to Boston, where Abba finds a job as a sort of a social worker of the day in a new mission. This is a quote from Louisa at that time. Every day is a battle, and I am so tired. She's a teenager, by the way, and I am so tired I don't want to live. At one point, the whole family comes down with smallpox, after Abba welcomed starving children into their residence. Every bit of the good and the bad that she's lived ends up in Little Women in some fashion, if you think about it. In 1852, the Hawthorns returned to Concord, and they buy Hillside. You don't want me to go back, but you know where I meant. It's Hillside, and they change the name to Wayside. He changes the looks of it substantially. He's got bucks now. He's just written The Scarlet Letter. It's the first real American novel. Wow. Rather exotic if you think about it. Very much part of his Salem roots and his puritanical background. The money saves the Alcotts, and by 1857 they return to Concord and they buy Orchard House. I believe this was a pig farm at one time, and it's in pretty bad shape, but they do fix it up. Again, that's where Bronson Alcott is good. He does do his orchards, he does do his vegetable gardens. It's the stuff he knows to do. Lizzie, the youngest of the kids, is suffering from scarlet fever. I would love to say it was that same beautiful, gentle death that we read in Little Women, but they said it was a very sad, much more unhealthy state that she was in for much time before she dies. It's not that graceful thing. Now, it's 1858 and Anna becomes engaged to John Pratt. Louisa says, I've lost Lizzie, Anna's engaged, my family's falling apart. Again, trace it back to Little Women. It all comes together as you can follow it. So it's the Civil War now. And at the outbreak of the Civil War, she volunteers as a nurse in Washington, D.C. This is a big deal. Women were not considered acceptable as nurses till that time. And they had to be respectable women, matrons, or spinster ladies. Louisa goes marching off. By January in Washington, she has pneumonia and typhoid fever. She has held dying military for days and days. She's done her work. She's seen everything horrible, and now she's violently ill. And what do they give her for this? Opium and calomel, of course. But the doses are huge and long. Dad does come and get her and bring her home. And she is never the same young woman that she was before. She writes something called hospital sketches. She's been writing all along. She's been writing potboilers, romances, under a variety of pseudonyms, usually with an initial for the first name so it's not male or female and she can get away with it. But this time, under her own name, she writes hospital sketches about her experiences. And she knows how powerfully she has felt about it. She gets her voice. She gets her voice, not this romantic potboiler's voice. She gets to Europe as a companion, and at some point meets a Polish refugee who's only 20 years old. She's 34 at the time, and he's only 20. Nobody's quite sure if this is a romance or just a nice interlude for her. But the belief is maybe that this becomes the Laurie of Little Women. It's the only time we ever read, and I've read a lot of books on her, that there's any romance in her life. And we're not even sure that it was romance or if it wasn't just a nice friendship. The other question they have is, could Thoreau have been Laurie? And I've read that many times too. Things to think about for fun. When she returns to Orchard House, this is the coolest part. Bronson is told nobody wants to publish his writings. He rambles. Oh my God, I was an English teacher. He rambles, shoot me. I can't read 10 words of his without going crazy. They say, no, we won't. But if your daughter would write a book for young women, we would consider it. They dangle that. And he just beats her down until she finally sits down at Orchard House and writes Little Women. It's the May of 1868. Abba is Marmee, Anna is Meg, Lizzie is Beth, May is Amy. It's not really complicated to figure out. And of course, Louisa is Jo March. Can I point something out to you? Where's Dad? She's rewriting her family history, isn't she? What'd she just get rid of? Dad's off to the Civil War and never makes an appearance. It's not called Little Family, it's called Little Women. And we find that she's a new story about her family, a better story, a quieter story. Mr. Lawrence is believed to probably be Mr. Emerson. And Louisa has had a chance to say, here's my story the way I wanted it to be. Now, part one is published. I never realized this until I started reading about her, but it's published in 2 parts. Huge success from the moment it's written. Part one is published on September 30th, 1868. It's $1.50. 3 illustrations by Sister May, who's a wonderful artist and goes on to Paris as an artist. Louisa is hounded to please marry Laurie to Joe in part 2. No, she says, I won't marry Joe to Laurie to please absolutely anyone. Still bugs me. She should have. But she didn't. And by the time part 2 was published in April of 1869, it is a huge success. She is from starving to wealthy. It's never been out of print. She has fame and fortune. It never fades for the rest of her life. But she's sick and sicker and sicker. The calomel, the opium, heaven knows what else she was given. The effects of the typhoid and the pneumonia. She's ill all the time. And she now feels responsible to support everyone. I kept waiting for her to be happy, and I'd never see her that for the rest of her life. That's the time she should have been. I also don't think that she respects Little Women as the writing that she thought she should be doing. Maybe the hospital sketches and some of, she didn't think it was serious enough. And then she writes Little Men and all of the accompanying ones to continue making money. Now she does get to take a trip to the Grand Tour of Europe with May, her sister, the only one that's still available. But May lands in Paris and marries and becomes a very respected artist, actually showing at the Paris Salon. She's that good. At this time, once Louisa is home, Abba dies in Concord, and Louisa is devastated. So Lizzie's dead, May's in Paris, Anne has been married a long time, and she's lost her mom, and she doesn't almost see how she's going to go on living, Louisa May. Orchard House is nothing without her mom. Now May, in France, gives birth to a daughter in 1879, nicknamed Lulu, heaven help us, Louisa May. She names her after her sister. And she dies after the sister dies after a month, after giving birth. Sends Lulu from France to America to be taken care of by a very sick and old before her time, Louisa May. Does not go well. I'll tell you right now, there's a book out on the subject. The girl stays with her for a short time. She arranges for nurses to take care of her because she's just not capable of this. And I don't think she has the heart. I think she's very depressed by now, Louisa May. But more than that, I'm amazed to find out that when she sends the child back to the in-laws, who are still alive and kicking, but this had been May's request, they never mention that she's related to Louisa May Alcott. And the girl, as an adult, starts to read about Louisa May Alcott and realizes that's her aunt, and this was her family. And they said it took her whole lifetime to find that out. She also has the charge of now her invalid father, who's had a stroke. And she's getting more ill with every passing year. I'm sad to say that she sells Orchard House in 1884. There's just too many ghosts for her there. And this is a quote from her: "Places have not much hold on me when the persons who made them dear are gone." I'm really pretty inside there. Just Really, if you want to take one tour of all the places, that's the one I probably would do. There's little, I like these copies with those illustrations, aren't they great? Never out of print. Well, on happier terms, we're going to look at Thoreau's Walden, and I laugh because I started looking at all the pictures I could do, and I could do the pencil factory, I could do the family home for Henry David's whole family because he's from Concord, I could do the Concord Academy School. But is there anything besides nature that I should be doing when I'm showing you Henry David Thoreau? Because that's all he cares about. He just finds nature everything for him. You know the quote. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only essential facts of life, and to see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. Very powerful. He's plain spoken, has a strong personality, very plain dressing, more than plain dressing, pretty grubby dressing. He cares little for conventional ways. He's a real individual. He attends Concord schools, and then he gets a full scholarship to Harvard. At Harvard, everyone has to wear a black coat. That's just a requirement. And if you don't, you get fined. Except he doesn't, because they realize that his green coat is homemade and he could not afford anything else. He is a complete outcast, and yet he doesn't care. And amazingly, when he graduates from Harvard, many years behind Emerson, his ranking is far, far higher than Emerson's ever was. He's a brilliant man who just marches, well, I have to steal it, marches to his own drummer. He gets a really good job in Concord. He gets to be a school teacher with great pay, and his family is very, very poor. But a couple of weeks in, one of the overseers comes in to see him teaching, and everybody is happy and animated and enjoying themselves. This isn't acceptable. Why isn't everybody looking dour and miserable and silent? He actually has them enjoying themselves. And he's reprimanded because he's not caning them. He's not hitting them. He's not keeping them under control. He's educating them in the way that he knows is best. He gets a little berserk. He's a young man at the time. He takes his cane and he starts to beat a couple of them, lightly. Please, don't have negative feelings. He does this for a couple of minutes, goes completely berserk, walks out the door, and resigns his extremely well-paying job, never to come back. But with John, his brother, he founds a nice private school, very progressive, and they have a wonderful time. They're devoted to each other. At a young age, for John, only 27, he nicks himself while shaving. Boy, if I was a man, I'd be a little nervous after you hear this one. He gets lockjaw and dies in Henry David's arms so many horrible days later. The sad part with Henry David is he thinks he's caught lockjaw, and he has a psychological case and for a while thinks he's dying as well, very tragically. We know he has many jobs. We know that he teaches and entertains children. He works for Emerson, so that school was only 4 years that he did this. We know a surveyor, a land surveyor, who knows the land better than him. And he helps in the family pencil factory. Any money he makes, he brings home to mom, helps in any way. He is truly a devoted family person. But when it becomes, at age 27, time for him to step away, you know where he goes. I don't have to tell you this. He goes to Walden Pond. Can I warn you? Walden Pond has huge fences around it right now, and they're doing major construction, and it was the only disappointment of our trip. They're doing some work down there, and it has to be protected, but I would say maybe by next summer it would be a lot better if I was going to do Walden Pond. That was our last stop of the day, and it was a little disappointing. Isn't he wonderful? I love Henry David. You can't go wrong with him, can you? So it's time for him to step away. Now, I'm sorry, but he goes to Walden Pond and builds his one-room home on Emerson's land. You're not going to hear anything in Concord without Emerson helping out. On July 4th, 1845, he moves into his small one-room house. And he stays there for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. He's not a hermit, and he doesn't pretend to be a hermit. If you read some of the stuff, people will say, well, he went to town. He never said he wasn't going to. He simply needed to step away. It was his retreat, if we would use the modern term for it. He comes to town, he sees friends, and people come to visit in his cabin. I wish they put the cabin in a more scenic location than the parking lot across the street from Walden Pond. But at least we get, and if you go inside, you can see, there's the cot, the desk. It's that simple, very simple little rustic look to it. And it's there, at least it's been reproduced by the Thoreau Lyceum, I believe. And I love the picture that the Hosmer children say. They said we'd go to the house on Sunday afternoons with Grandpa. Henry'd sit at his desk. Grandpa Hosmer would sit on the one chair besides the desk chair. We'd sit all along the edge of the bed, and they would talk for a while, and then Henry would take us out and row us around on the pond, and then he'd take out his flute. He is the Pied Piper, guys. He'd take out his flute and play on the water, and they remembered it as adults as the most magical time of their lives. Others would come out. He went to Sunday dinner at his mother's house, and his mother by then had a boarding house. And he always went to Sunday dinner. He was a good son, a good man, definitely. He writes the book, and one of his big reasons for going to Walden is to write a week on the Concord and Merrimack rivers while he's there, and that's in memory of his brother John. And he keeps a journal. That's what Walden starts from. It's a journal during his stay at Walden Pond. 9 years later, it becomes the book Walden, after he's given a talk at the Lyceum in Concord about something else, and he says everybody could keep raising their hand and asking him questions about, why did you go to Walden Pond and stay in that silly little house that you built? And he won't call it a cabin, by the way, he calls it a house. He says you don't need a big house. You've got everything you need right there. Simplicity. And he said, I better pull my notes out, my journal, and I need to explain this. And from those questions at that Lyceum, he decides to look at his notes and put together why he went to Walden Pond. Now, as a transcendentalist, he believed that people are by nature good, and that the more we create a little space between ourselves and the world, the more we can access what's been within us all along. I don't see him crashing like the others. I don't see him falling apart. I see him always finding nature to give him the strength. He writes in Walden, direct your eye right inward, and you will find 1,000 regions in your mind yet undiscovered. Travel them. We know Henry David loved children, especially the Alcotts and the Emersons, and he's very close to Louisa. He feels Waldo Emerson is more mentor than just dear friend. He's really guided him. And I love this. He stays friends with Bronson Alcott. He has more patience than many of the others. And he calls him the first authentic, Bronson calls Henry David Thoreau, turn this around, the first authentic American voice. Do you love that? Henry David Thoreau, the first authentic American voice. As he becomes friends with Hawthorne, again, a frankly unfriendly man, Nathaniel says he's a singular character, a young man with much of the wild, original nature still remaining in him. He's at heart a poet. He's living in the moment. He's alert to capture the fleeting beauty of the natural world. He's not just a philosopher, he's living the transcendental philosophy. That's what I see in Walton. And you know these words. My gosh, I love these words. I mean, Walden was my Bible of the 60s. And growing up in Westminster, that was absolutely the book. And I still have that same copy sitting there waiting for me today. I learned this at least by my experiment, that if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life of which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. We've only got, hang in there, only a little bit more. Okay, I love this. This is just beautiful. Does everybody use the different drummer thing? I use it constantly. Oh, they seem to march to their different drummer. Absolutely. And that is a picture of, I sort of have a picture of him on the water, although, of course, it's a modern picture. Margaret didn't take a much better picture than Emma, did she? But the fact is, she wrote Woman in the 19th Century. Very important. Does she ever live in Concord? No. She stays with Emerson. Oh my God, she stays all summer for a couple of summers. And Lydian is not a happy camper. She goes and stays with the Hawthorns for a while. She visits with Sister Ellen, who is the one with the child that ends up in the cold water as a lobster. She has the mind of a man. And that's a huge, big deal, because women weren't supposed to have a whole lot of brains. You were supposed to be reproductive and wiferly, and there was, I think it was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, was like, a woman's whole role in life is to take care of a man in all ways. That's all she should be for. Okay. So, she's considered the mind, I'm being careful here tonight. She's considered the mind of a man. Another time you could see the steam coming out of my ears. Thoreau considers her a rarity, a woman worth listening to. Wow. Yeah, I know. She's brought up by a very dominant father. This isn't Sarah Ripley's wonderful experience of loving education. Dad is actually punitive and mean in his demanding she learn things. She ends up very uptight. Oh, sorry. She becomes, see, that's Margaret Fuller. She got me all upset. She becomes very uptight. She's overpowering. She's very outspoken, but she's also very nervous. Not a peaceful person. The theory is that Emerson and Hawthorne love their walks and their talks with her, and they're excited because she's this brilliant woman, and that would never dawn on them that Sophia Peabody or Lydian Jackson, their wives, who are brilliant, well-educated women, but they're wives, so you would never have those same conversations with them, because a wife doesn't have that role. So she serves an interesting role. She becomes a big part of the transcendental group and goes to the meetings, and that's very unusual. It's almost exclusively men, although I have seen Sarah Ripley was invited more than once. Again, a relative of Emerson's and one of the most brilliant women on earth. Her conversations at Elizabeth Peabody's bookstore in Boston are hugely important. Women come in from New York and stay for a week to hear them. Her goal is to improve the status of women, and her treatise, Woman in the 19th Century, declares that woman does not belong to her husband. Oh, how could she say that? Goodness. But instead should be side by side as a partner. It's about as radical as it comes back then. It was time, this is a quote from her, it was time that men changed their tone of feeling towards women as towards slaves. Woo, strong words. And she was the huge beginning piece of the women's rights movement. You couldn't make this up as a soap opera. It's one of those things that if you saw it on TV, you'd say, that's just baloney. She goes to Europe as an international reporter for the war in Italy, the revolution in Italy. She falls in love, marries, has a lovely baby boy, meets Elizabeth Barrett Browning, meets all of the famous women over there, loves it over there, but realizes she needs to come home. They're on the ship coming home, and the ballast of the ship is all Carrara marble. I think I would not have gotten on that ship. As they're coming into Long Island, they make it all the way over. The original captain has died of smallpox en route, and a very green first mate is trying to get them into Long Island by Fire Island, which has some sort of a large barrier, sort of reef there, or a barrier area, sandbar. It's the sandbar, and you can see them. You can see the boat. And somewhere along the way, nobody goes out, nobody rescues them, and everybody drowns. Some people do get away, but she, her husband, and the baby all drown. Something like so many hundreds of feet from American land. The sad part, besides losing her for the women's movement, although it does almost put her on a pedestal, and a memory as a pedestal, the sad part is people were worried when she came home with that foreign man. Was it a real marriage? How are we going to accept her? So some said perhaps it was for the best, which I thought was absolutely tragic. Last slide, I think it is the last slide. Hang in there. The Robbins house is on the left, and this is the only thing I could find for Concord Anti-Slavery Society, just to give it as an example. Blake and I did a nice tour of the Concord Museum, again, just this last month, and this is brand new to me, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring it to you as very new material to me, so I'm not giving you the details that I just don't know. There are at least 30 families of African American heritage living in Concord in the 1800s. One family that I learned about at the Concord Museum was that of Jack Garrison, who escaped slavery in the 1790s, came to Concord, where he marries Susan Robbins. This is the Robbins house. She's one of the founders of the Concord, and I want you to hear this, female anti-slavery society. Their son John helped Thoreau plant a garden at the Old Manse for the newlyweds Nathaniel and Sophia, and their daughter Ellen was a prominent Boston social activist before the Civil War and a school teacher later in the Reconstructed South. Very important. The Robbins house, Blake and I literally were parked across the street from the old bridge on the first day that it was closed because the government closed down, but we still were able to park our car there and to see the North Bridge. And there was this house, so we went up and took a look. It's called the Robbins House, and it's considered the home of the descendants of Caesar Robbins, a Revolutionary War patriot, and it's the center for Concord's African American history. If you go on their site, you can get far more information. I just wanted to make sure that I offer this to you. And it's been moved from the original Meadows area to grounds across the street from the old North Bridge. So if you park in that parking lot, it's been moved there. When is it open? I would definitely go online to check that out. And the very last thoughts on that, the Alcotts, the Emersons, and the Thoreau families were all active in the anti-slavery movement. Thoreau served as part of the Underground Railroad, personally transporting people himself. And the Alcotts definitely housed escaping slaves many times. The women were all active in the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society, and that includes Lydian, who didn't do a lot of other things, but definitely was part of that as well. Over and over again, Louisa May Alcott says this was one of the most important parts of her life, more important than writing Little Women, that she was part of this movement. She felt very strongly about it. Remember, she went off to be a nurse during the Civil War. This is important to her. Here's the names to finish you off here. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, fiery old John Brown, all spoke out against slavery in Concord. Emerson spoke as well, and this is my favorite. He goes to speak as a person, as an abolitionist, as anti-slavery, at the church. And he asks the sextant to ring the bell to show that the meeting is coming to order. And the sextant and many of the church members were not anti-slavery, and he refuses to ring the bell. Who rings the bell? Henry David. get out of my way. I'm going up and I'm going to ring the bell. I'll call the people in. These are people that lived their truths, that figured things out in this new world. Literature, philosophy, relationship to the environment and nature, their relationship to God, who they were as a people. Not English, not European, this brand new tribe, self-reliant, perfectible. And based on that, I can't think of anybody that could inspire us more to live our own truths more today than using them by their writings and by their example. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Ellen, very much. We appreciate you coming. Just one small tidbit. I don't know if you caught, which we talked about Henry David Thoreau. For a short while, he made pencils with the family to make a living. He bought the lead and graphite from a Frederick Tudor, who made his fortune making ice. But he was also an investor, and one of his investments was in a graphite mine in Sturbridge, Massachusetts. So Henry David Thoreau was making pencils with graphite from our own graphite mine. Just a little tidbit. Anyway, thank you for coming, and November 20th, join us for the story about the Quabbin. Thank you.